Hey, welcome. Today, we're diving into some really fascinating neuroscience that might just completely change how we think about our kids, their behavior, and especially our schools. It's a new story, one we're calling collective individuality.
I want to start with just a number, 1 in 5. Just let that sink in for a second.
What is that? Well, that's the number of kids and young people in England who were identified as having a probable mental disorder just last year. It is a staggering figure, and it points to a crisis that's just getting bigger. We're seeing so much more anxiety, more emotional dysregulation, and just plain exhaustion in our classrooms.
And it forces us to ask a really tough question. What if the very systems we've designed to help our children learn are actually unintentionally contributing to their distress?
Okay, so this brings us right into the classroom. Our modern educational systems, they often prioritize standardization, quiet, sitting still kind of learning, and really narrow definitions of what success looks like. But what if a child's fidgeting, or their distraction isn't a failure to comply? What if it's a signal of what's happening deep inside their nervous system?
And this, right here, is the crucial shift in perspective we're going to explore today. Are we just looking at defiance or some kind of deficit in the child? Or, and this is the big question, could we be witnessing a totally natural, adaptive response to an environment that's causing them stress?
To really get this, we have to go a little beyond the basics. Most of us have heard of the fight or flight response, right? And it's a good starting point, for sure, but neuroscience has moved so far beyond it, and it now offers a much richer picture of how our bodies and our brains respond to the world around us.
A huge piece of this puzzle is something called Polyvagal Theory. Now, the core idea is actually pretty simple, but it is profound. Our ability to learn, to connect, to be creative, it all depends on our nervous system feeling safe. Without that foundational sense of safety, the higher, more complex parts of our brain, they're just not accessible.
So, polyvagal theory is a fantastic start, but it's not the whole story. The idea of a simple ladder, going from safe to fight or flight to shutdown, it doesn't quite capture the incredible complexity of our internal worlds.
And this is where a concept called the Doctrine of Autonomic Space comes in. Okay, think of your nervous system less like a simple on-off switch and more like a sound mixing board. Your fight or flight system and your rest and digest system, they're like two separate faders. They can both be high, both be low, or anywhere in between, creating this huge variety of possible internal states. And that leads to our next idea, distributed adaptive control. Picture a pyramid. The base layer, the foundation, that's our fundamental bodily regulation, feeling safe, feeling physically well. And it's only when that base is stable that we can really access the higher levels of planning and abstract thought. It's so simple. You can't think well if you don't feel well.
So, what does all this neuroscience actually mean? Well, it leads to a really powerful conclusion. Every single child has a completely unique neurobiological profile. You could call it an autonomic fingerprint that shapes everything about how they experience and respond to the world. As the research says, individual differences are not peripheral to development, but central to it. For so long, we've been treating individuality as an afterthought, when it turns out it's the main event.
And this is where we can really start to reframe behavior. So take a look here. A child's profile might be high reactivity. In the classroom, this looks like being anxious or intense. But the potential strength of that exact same wiring, that's where you find incredible empathy and creativity. Or, what about a child with a blunted profile? They might look passive or disengaged, but their potential strength is deep persistence and this amazing talent for calm observation.
And that right there brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. So often, what we label as misbehavior is actually a mismatch. It's a clash between a child's unique autonomic fingerprint and an environment that's just too rigid to meet their needs.
So let's compare these two ways of thinking, side by side. The old lens, it has us judging the behavior itself.
But the new lens asks us to get curious, to try and understand the internal state that is driving that behavior.
The old lens immediately looks for what's wrong. It tries to identify a deficit in the child, while the new lens helps us recognize a mismatch with the environment. See how that completely flips the script? It shifts the responsibility from fixing the child to adjusting the context.
Okay, so if we accept this new understanding, what do we do about it? How do we actually build an educational model that honors this incredible science?
Well, here are 4 really key shifts. First, we have to move from just managing behavior to a state-based understanding.
Second, we make relational safety a core principle, not just an optional extra. Third, we have to normalize movement and sensory breaks as essential tools for learning. And fourth, we diversify how we assess kids so we can finally start to recognize all the amazing gifts they have, the ones that are embodied, creative, and interpersonal, not just academic.
You know, when you boil it all down, it really comes to this. The goal of education should not be to standardize children. It should be to understand their unique wiring and then create the conditions where every single one of them can flourish.
And that leaves us with one final thought to carry forward. What unique perspectives, what creativity, what absolute genius are we missing out on as a society when our systems only value and reward one way of being in the world?